Hello, everyone. A warm welcome to this global policy dialogue to turbocharge SDG implementation hosted by the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, also known as UN DESA. My name is Shakuntala Santharan, Shaks for short, and I will be your moderator today. This is a two-part series. We'll hear about some best practices and new ideas for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly the goals that will be reviewed in depth at next month's UN High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. Today's session is about accelerating clean water and energy for all, exploring SDG 6 and 7, SDG 6 being our goal for clean water and sanitation, and SDG 7, our goal for affordable and clean energy for all. With our guests today, we'll talk about how these goals are interlinked and how progress on one can support the achievement of the other. We're glad to be able to connect more people to this important conversation on how to make the SDGs our reality by 2030. We're already at the halfway point of this agenda, and we have a lot of work to do. To plan for where we're going, we need to know where we are. To help us assess SDG progress, we'll get the latest data from the Sustainable Development Goals Report 2023, the full version of which will be released next month by UN DESA. Before we dive into this, here are a few practical tips for this session. If you're watching on Zoom, multilingual captions are available by clicking on the captioning icon at the bottom of your screen. We encourage you to spread the word on what you hear today on social media by using the hashtag Global Goals. We also encourage you to join in the discussion by sending us your questions and voting up others' questions via our interactive Slido tool. To view polls and ask your questions on Slido, just go to slido.com and insert the code hashtag Global Goals, which you can see on your screen. And that's it for the housekeeping. We have a few polls for you, our audience, using the Slido tool during this program. Here's the first one. Of these options, what do you think is the biggest roadblock to investment in SDGs 6 and 7? Is it 1, global inflation, or is it misinformation, insufficient technology, or lack of political will, or might it be something else? We'd love to know your thoughts. Please do cast your votes. I'll give you a minute to get familiar with Slido and vote. Meanwhile, check out this video of the latest SDG progress reports. And that helps set the scene for our conversations today. Let's take a look now at our first poll results. So we've got lack of political will coming in at the top with 60% of the votes, and global inflation coming in at 17%, followed by misinformation at 9%, then insufficient technology at 4%, and some other reasons that you think are the possible biggest roadblocks to investment in SDGs 6 and 7. Please do keep your votes coming in. There are no wrong answers. These are all important, and we thank you for continuing to share what you think with us. Now let's kick off our first conversation on partnerships and co-beneficial innovations for clean water and energy for all. We know from the UN Water Conference held here in New York in March this year that action is needed now to get water access to the 2 billion people who still don't have it, while some 700 million people lack access to energy. Let's ask our expert guests their views on how we can correct this. With me here in the studio, we have Navid Hanif, who is the UN Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development at UN DESA. Joining us virtually, we have Ambuj Sagar in New Delhi, in India. He is Professor of Policy Studies and the founding head of the School of Public Policy at the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi. He is also a member of the independent group of scientists preparing the 2023 Global Sustainable Development Report. Also joining us virtually from Asuncion in Paraguay is Maria Guin. She's a member of the Governing Council of Itaipu Binacional, co-organizer with UN DESA of the Sustainable Water and Energy Solutions Partnership Initiative. A very warm welcome. Thank you all for joining us. So, as we saw in that opening video, some stark figures. We've heard the UN Secretary General say that the world is far off track overall from achieving the SDGs by 2030. Navid, can you give us a preview of this SDG progress report? Where exactly are we with SDGs 6 and 7?
The picture is not very promising, I will say at the outset. We did make progress. Let me also begin with good news. We did make progress between 2015 and 2021. So around 7 years, the number of people having access to safely managed water, sanitation increased. And significant improvement in people having access to energy. 689 million people or so got access to energy. We had improvement of 4% in people getting access to safely managed water. So these were indicators going up. We were making progress. But it's because of the shocks, COVID, the war in Ukraine, and monetary tightening, the resulting inflation, and also geopolitical situation. Now we are not moving in the positive direction. We see if we continue on this trajectory, 2030, we may have still 2 billion people without access to safely managed water. And you just mentioned 700 million people may not have access to affordable clean energy. So the trends at this juncture are worrying. And the promise that we had made in 2015 is in peril. And SDG has called for a rescue plan for the SDGs. We have proposed 49 actions in the progress report, all covering policy areas, but also on financing and capacity building.
Can you tell us briefly about a bit more about some of these action steps?
Let me just focus on energy. Energy is the biggest opportunity in our recent history, this transition to stimulate growth, to lower cost of energy in the long term, and create jobs also. Just think of this. We will save around $23 billion if we shift from fossil fuels to renewable energies. We'll create 24 to 25 million jobs and losing only 6 to 7 million jobs once this transition is completed. And jobs which will be good for societies, good for global well-being, both environmental and planet's future. So there are clear areas where we can make a big headway. Look at water. Once we increase access to safely managed water, we reduce our health costs immediately. For every $1 invested in clean water, you save $4.05 in your health expenditure. So these are the opportunities coming our way. And the report clearly conveys. The sad thing is we have the technologies, knowledge, know-how, evidence. What are we missing? Political will, resources and capacities in developing countries. Those who have plans ready to go through these transitions, but they just don't have access to the resources they need, technologies that should be deployed, and human capacity.
Thank you, Naveed. So clearly, so much remains to be done. Ambuj, you're working on the 2023 Global Sustainable Development Report. How does that tie in with the report that Naveed was telling us about?
Thanks. So let me maybe start with the main message of the Global Sustainable Development Report 2023. And I think the kind of central theme is going to be that the achievement of the SDGs is all about managing transformations. And we make the point there that such transformations are possible. In other words, transformations towards the SDGs. And in fact, the transformations are inevitable. But the question is, since I think as has been laid out in the initial comments, that we are actually still quite far from where we need to be, and we have a very short time frame. I think the point is we have to accelerate these transformations, and to do so, you need to understand the nature of the transformations so you can better guide and shape them. And I think that's what I'm hoping that our report is going to be able to help the readers understand, both the importance of the transformations and also how to guide and shape them. Let me use this this notion of transformations to think through this, one of the two SDGs we are talking about, which is, I'll also talk a little bit about energy, because in some sense it's really, as Naveed said, it really is a huge opportunity. So SDG 7 is about a clean and affordable energy for all. And I think, so it really is about two kinds of transformations. One is a transformation towards clean energy from polluting sources of energy today that especially are particularly problematic from a point of view of climate change. And that we're already undergoing that transition. There is a huge movement towards renewable energy, which is a clean form of energy. But we are not moving fast enough on that. And so we can accelerate that transformation towards clean energy by taking a strategic approach. For example, we know that we need to develop new technologies such as improved energy storage, and that requires investments towards R&D to make sure that new options are available. But we also have options such as solar photovoltaic that are implementable now. And there, it's a different stage of the transformation. It's more about actually scaling up deployment, and that requires project finance and other kinds of resources. So, and of course, different countries are at different stages of the transformation for these clean energy sources. And if one understands how to actually manage the transformation in that particular national context, in relationship to the national objectives, one can absolutely accelerate these transformations. But the second transformation, which is a little bit more tricky, which is actually making this clean energy affordable and accessible to all. Actually, the number that you mentioned, 700 million, that really is about the number of people who don't have access to electric power, which is one form of clean energy. But we also need clean energy for cooking. A lot of people are using polluting forms of energy for cooking, and that actually is over 2 billion people. So the scale of the challenge is really enormous. But we can recognize that the clean energy transformation that I talked about earlier, the movement towards renewable forms of energy, is something that can also actually help drive the second transformation towards making this clean energy affordable for all. To give you an example, as clean energy forms are deployed across the world, it becomes cheaper and therefore more affordable and more accessible for other people who don't have access today. Of course, that's not enough. We need to go beyond the fact that these forms of energy are getting cheaper and therefore potentially more accessible. We also have to put in place the kinds of policies and actions to drive this second transformation of making sure this energy is accessible for all. And I think our view in the Global Sustainable Development Report is, if one understands the nature of these transformations and is able to take a strategic approach, we should certainly be able to accelerate these transformations and hopefully help us move much faster and much more effectively towards the achievement of these SDGs. Thanks.
Thank you, Ambuj. Now, these two SDGs 6 and 7 are linked, aren't they? Because energy is required for water treatment and sanitation, and we need water for energy production. So when we make progress in one, we can benefit the other. Now, Maria, your organization, the Itaipu Binacional, is a partnership between Paraguay and Brazil, and together you operate the world's third largest hydroelectric power plant, right, which is on the border of Brazil and Paraguay. It's a great example, isn't it, of cross-border cooperation and also how these two SDGs are linked.
Yes, that's right. Thank you very much for the invitation to DESA, and thank you for having me here in this dialogue. I think Itaipu is a wonderful example of transboundary water cooperations. It was created by a treaty signed between Brazil and Paraguay to jointly create Itaipu to use the international river Paraná and to produce energy. As you said, today we have the largest production of hydropower, and we're using this international river in an equitable and reasonable manner. And of course, talking about all of this, I think pointing specifically the SDG goal 6.5, transboundary cooperation in our region is not just the organization, but in South America, the whole region has a very good example on how to manage the river for complying with the many uses that the water of this river can provide to different actors and to different countries. For example, we had the experience of an extreme drought in the region. And yet, of course, you have an international river where you have to use many kinds of uses of this water. Brazil needed for energy, Paraguay as well for energy, but at the same time, being a landlocked country, it was crucial for them to have the navigation possible, and also Argentina, even for water consumption. But with this extreme drought, what happened was the tensions arose in how to use and to satisfy the needs of this river. And yet what happened was that the countries, so this will that sometimes it's often said that it's lacking, but there are places in the world, and South America was a positive example for this. With this will, political will, there was an intergovernmental commission formed to actually assess technically how much water every actor, every party needed in order to satisfy the use of that river, what they needed. And after this intergovernmental commission was formed, there was all parties could find a balanced solution of how much water exactly they needed, and without compromising the production of energy, allowing the flow of water for the ships to get out, and also the water consumption. So only through a dialogue and a compromise among all actors that included not only riparian states, but also other important stakeholders like ship owners and Itaipu itself, an entity to generate energy, they all, by talking together and dialogue, overcame this challenge and actually could find a balanced solution which managed the water and still was able to give a balanced solution for all actors involved to get the needs that they needed for the river. So it's a very positive example as well. What is important is to have actions and to have this political will that is often also there, and we should take these as best practices as an example for other regions in the world.
Yeah, partnerships and cooperation across sectors and across borders clearly so vital to move the needle forward in the right direction. Now, Maria, the global energy system used roughly 10% of total global freshwater withdrawals in 2021. The International Energy Agency is saying that less water will be required for energy in a net zero emissions pathway. So could an acceleration towards clean energy, towards sustainable energy, actually help ease the world's water crisis?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, we need to accelerate the clean energy development, and this will, of course, have positive impacts also on the water crisis. And I will give you an example, and exactly relating a little bit on this example of the drought. I mean, we use the most renewable source of energy to produce, like water to produce energy, and this, of course, will be a challenge when there is no water. And of course, but you will still, in an ever-growing population, the demand will also grow. So you will still need your energy. So if you want to keep it from being a renewable source and from hydropower, then of course you have to today take responsibility in doing an action today to prepare for that adverse environmental impact that you may have tomorrow. And the example I want to give is that even though our main goal is to produce hydropower, use the water of an international river to produce energy, we can also use the technologies that we have today to increase this installed capacity of the production of energy with other renewable sources, for example, solar. So that when we in the future might have a water crisis again or a reduced amount of flow, then by increasing and coupling these and complementing these other sources of energy into providing countries and the communities and the societies with the energy needed, but continuing being an energy stemming from a renewable source, that will, of course, help in the future the water crisis, and also it will be a more equitable solution when other countries or actors also need the other uses of that water. So the mitigation and balancing of that uses can be helped today by preparing in advance to the adverse environmental impacts, like using technology to increase the installed capacity with other sources of renewable energy like solar.
So you mentioned the use of technology. Ambuj, you're an innovation expert in technology and energy. Can you share some examples with us of clean water or clean energy solutions?
Oh, I mean, clean energy solutions, there's just a long list of technologies that actually have been developed in the last few years. I mean, solar photovoltaics, we are all reading about that, and we are seeing those panels more and more in most parts of the world. I think that really has been a revolution in the last couple of decades in how that's become much more, the prices have come down and therefore it's become much more competitive. And as we scaled up production, we really have started seeing deployment of solar PV across the world. Wind power is, of course, another clean energy resource that has been around for a while, but again, has picked up massively in the last few decades. Having said that, I think we should also recognize that the game is, I mean, I think it's a point I'd made earlier that given the fact that we are quite far from meeting our challenges and meeting our objectives, and time is limited, whether we are talking about the SDG for 2030 or whether we are talking net zero 2050. These are extremely ambitious goals, and therefore there is much more we need to do. And part of it, as I mentioned earlier, is to accelerate the deployment of the technologies that are already available, like solar and wind. But it is also making other forms of energy technologies more available, whether it's energy storage, or whether we are thinking about clean forms of energy for transport. You know, we're talking about electric vehicles as a way of moving people from point A to point B in a much cleaner fashion. There is work going on all of this, but there's obviously much more to be done. And as I mentioned, of course, this is a common challenge for everybody, is clean energy to address, at this point, primarily the climate challenge. But making sure that these clean sources of energy are available for all people who don't have that access today, will also require different forms of innovation. And some of it may be technological innovation to drive down the prices or to come up with low energy devices for households where you don't have a huge amount of electric power available. But also other forms of innovation, maybe business model innovations and financial innovations that actually will make these technologies more available. So I think I want to kind of highlight that point that when we talk about innovation to make technology more available and accessible, of course, there's technical innovation, but also other forms of innovation that can also contribute to meeting those objectives that we're interested in.
So you were telling us earlier, Naveed, that the energy transition can create jobs. There's an opportunities here, aren't there? How can clean energy, this move towards clean energy and clean water, be economic development opportunities?
Energy transition, first and foremost, has to be just. That's UN's position, repeatedly mentioned in every document. And what do I mean by just transition? Energy transition has its social costs in terms of jobs, in terms of disruptions. So all those costs have to be addressed in a just manner. I will briefly mention what are the opportunities here. Stimulating economic growth, increasing productivity, long-term reduction of cost in terms of generation and usage, and then saving the planet. So all of these results can be achieved just by this transition. But I also want to clarify, the economic opportunity cannot be translated into reality if we go by project finance. And I use an analogy which I think is, for me, it's very apt. The patient needs a bypass surgery and you're giving her baby aspirin. It won't work that way. It truly is to bypass the addiction to fossil fuels and move into renewable energies, and technologies are available. Those can be made easily affordable. What are we missing? Look, last year, unfortunately, or a year ago, flows to developing countries on energy transitions have gone down by $10.2 billion. But the good news is, in 2021, the investments in renewables were $1.2 trillion, more than the fossil fuels. But where? Developed countries and China. The rest of the world is not benefiting. So that's what we need to unlock these resources for the countries. So what do we need? We actually, after Glasgow, we came up with JETPs, Just Energy Transition Partnerships. In some countries, they are working because they are getting, Indonesia is one of them. They're getting the commitments they need for these transitions. So we need national plans in place, and many countries have them. Political commitment is there. Then they need access to resilient, diversified supply chains. It was just mentioned battery storage technologies and also innovation in their institutions, the way they collect revenue, the way they govern these networks and supply chains. So when those are in place, what do they need? Human capacity and financing. If we bring all of these elements together, I think most of the developing countries are ready for just transitions. And these are opportunities for growth, job creation, and in the end, for long-term development trajectory.
Does this apply to SDG 6, to clean water and sanitation as well?
SDG 6, largely so, but I want to add 2 words of caution. The perception in a society is that water is free. Is a basic human right. When you go to collect your revenue charges for electricity, people are mentally prepared to pay the bill. When you go for water charges or put a price on it, I'm not saying it's not one of the feasible ways to do it. The perception in a society is water has to be a basic human right, it should be free. Let me give you 3 ways to look at this problem. First, access to clean water and sanitation are basic needs. But 70% of the water is used for agriculture, which has commercial usage. And then around 18-20% for industry. So what we need to do is come up with incentives, regulations, and innovations to address all 3 dimensions of water usages in a society. So when it comes to basic needs, which is sanitation and clean drinking water, there we need to have a mix of water pricing, but also ensuring people have access to water who can't even afford it. So strike a balance there. But I'm for putting some price on water to minimize its overconsumption and misuse and abuse and wastage. So we have to find a way. Regulation, incentives, innovations in a society will work to find that balance.
As you rightly pointed out, we have to change the way we value water. That came up again and again in the UN 2023 water conference. Now, so clearly there are economic development opportunities here when we make progress on these two SDGs. And progress in these two SDGs can also lead to progress on other goals, right? Maria, how can innovations in water and clean energy move us towards our global climate goals?
Well, as we all know, the Paris Agreement's purpose is to limit the increase of the global average temperature, and we have to pursue the efforts to limit this increase to 1.9 Celsius. But to achieve this, we have to do two things. Firstly, all parties need to reduce their emissions as soon as possible, but also to accelerate this transition to a low carbon economy. But there is something, an aspect in the Paris Agreement that we should also not forget, and is this principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, and also respecting the different capabilities, especially in developing countries. So it was mentioned a little bit, but this is something that brings us together, like not to see all sectors differently and see them as sectors, but bring every SDG as a connector. We have to try to achieve actions that will involve all SDGs together. In the case of Itaipu, for example, we have the sheer amount of production of clean and renewable energy. But we know that to achieve all the purpose of actually contributing and make our effort in our time to fight climate change, then we also have to move forward to other actions. We are aware of the interdependence between water and energy, and this is why also we need to consider the whole ecosystem surrounding the water and the protection of the environment. That's why, for example, from our organization, we put a lot of efforts and how to finance some actions that include some of the region's most drastic reforestation programs, for example, because it will, in the end, also protect the water system of the region, as well as actions to preserve and conserve, for example, the Atlantic forest of the Alto Paraná, actions that today are actually restoring what was completely degraded before. So, and not stop with that, but also monitor sediments in the water as well to keep the water running and have this. So a constant control and monitoring of the quality of water is also very important, but also promoting other efficient energy projects and also projects on renewable, for example, in other areas of the country. Help societies to have, for example, solar power projects to completely make possible for a community that's isolated sometimes to have this energy generation. So these are all actions that Itaipu is doing on top or in addition of just the sheer production of renewable energy, but also making sure that the ecosystem is protected and also promoting research, innovation, and other projects stemming from renewables.
Now let's get some audience questions now. If we could bring those up on the screen for you. We have a question here from Mia Hornbeck in Copenhagen, Denmark. In what ways do you anticipate international financing to address emerging trends in energy and or water development? Naveed, perhaps a question you can help answer.
Yeah, it's a very pertinent question. And what we have been asking, what is the biggest challenge? The capital is very impatient. Short-termism cannot be the answer to long-term transition to renewable energy and safe energy for the planet. So we are asking for long-term affordable loans to countries who would like to pursue these transitions. And the models are available. We have also mentioned multilateral development banks. While the private sector is still adjusting to this reality, multilateral development banks can do it. And we have presented a plan called SDG Stimulus, which is primarily meant to generate $500 billion to $1 trillion a year of long-term affordable loans for countries. We say maturity date should be 40 to 50 years, and they should be as low as 2%. I know in the current environment, it may look unreasonable, but in the long term, the returns will be worth it, both for people and the planet. So that's one way of doing it. Second, we need to also mobilize private capital. And that's where governments need to come up with innovative instruments, risk sharing, and nudging the private sector to go into so-called frontier markets, countries who desperately need this capital. So innovations are available, and we are also coming up with new instruments. In infrastructure also, energy infrastructure is also an expensive undertaking. So these are the kind of measures we need to take in the public sector and nudge the private sector to move in that direction.
Here's another question from our audience. Can you highlight a good solution for managing wastewater? This question from Alamianda Madan Kumar in Madurai, India. Can you help answer that for us, Ambush, very quickly?
I must confess, I'm not really a water expert, but let me take a stab at it. There are many ways to actually reduce water consumption. One is, I think, the point that was made earlier that 70% of the world's water is used for agriculture. And that's one place where we certainly can be much more efficient with our water use. Naveed was right in saying that when water is provided for free, it tends to be overused, with actually, especially in the case of agriculture, with detrimental consequences even for the soil productivity and agricultural productivity. And there obviously, places like Israel have been absolutely at the cutting edge of using drip irrigation, for example, to use water much more efficiently for agricultural uses. So I think that certainly would be one place where we could save with the right kinds of incentives and also the right kinds of technologies. We certainly could substantially reduce water use, which not only will be beneficial from the point of view of making water available for other applications, but also be beneficial for the agriculture sector itself.
Okay, Maria, did you want to jump in there as well? I'm not sure. Do you have any answers on how to handle wastewater?
Yes, one of the things that we're trying to contribute in that area is, for example, to creating and helping communities and municipalities to have waste treatment plants installed so by helping in building this waste treatment plant, all the water that is actually processed, clean, and also it helps also the monitoring of the quality of water. At the same time, for example, we are using the reservoir as a multi-purpose dam reservoir and also helping the agriculture sector, but then having an extra, for example, plan to actually make sure that after, for example, the agricultural uses of the water are being met, then it goes through a plant where it's again being cleaned with the chemicals and anything that it's being treated in the agriculture to only then be returned again to the river. These are helpful projects that have given very good results. And it's also, we can test that through the monitoring of the quality of the water of the river. So it has helped the communities as well, but it's also a way to also help our resources to keep to keep them in good shape.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your vital perspectives and insights. It's time now for our second audience poll. The question this time is, how do you think that vulnerable groups can be better placed to make an impact on SDG 6 and 7? Might it be include them more meaningfully in policy making, or give them access to financial resources for startups, or better train them at school and university? Or do you think it's something else? We'll give you a couple of minutes to vote. In the meantime, here's a message from the UN's Under Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs.
There's an urgent need for all of us to rally behind our Sustainable Development Goals. We have reached the midpoint in our timeline to achieve these goals, but very unfortunately, we have been losing our ground. We need to refocus our efforts and work together to get them back on track. This is where the high-level political forum on sustainable development comes in. We'll have the governments, businesses, civil society, young people, and the other international actors to join us to turbocharge our efforts, our resolve to achieve the SDG. We need to be more ambitious and determined in the way that we make and take our own actions and take our own decisions. And we need to have the bold and impactful commitments. The forum will set the stage for the SDG Summit in coming September, when the world leaders will gather here to recommit to our SDG action. This is our chance, perhaps the final chance, to make a meaningful breakthrough and to deliver on our promise and to honor our commitments, to build a life of dignity and prosperity for every human being on a healthy planet. The SDGs are not just 17 lofty goals. They represent real lives with real needs. They represent women and children, young and old, you and me. They represent a chance to fulfill our potential. Ultimately, they represented our shared future. Let's do it together.
Call to action there. And now let's have a quick look at our second poll results. We have the question, how do you think that vulnerable groups can be better placed to make an impact on SDG 6 and 7? 57% right there at the top, include them more meaningfully in policy making, followed by give them access to financial resources for startups with 29% of your vote, and better train them at school and university at 13%. And 4% of you have voted for something else. Remember, there are no wrong answers. These are all part of the solution, and we are grateful for your opinions. Now that leads us nicely into our second panel on solutions for inclusive clean water and energy. With me here in the studio is Crystal Ann Briggs, who is youth advocate for technological sustainability in clean water and energy and representative of the major group for children and youth. Joining us virtually, we have Faraitun Huma, who is in Nairobi, Kenya. She is a senior advisor on WASH, which is short for Water, Sanitation and Hygiene at UNICEF. And Elisa Vaillancourt joins us from Montreal in Canada. She's a youth Project Manager at the International Secretariat for Water. Thank you all very much for joining us today. Now, Farai, if we could start with you, please. What are the special challenges and opportunities for vulnerable groups with these two SDGs? Clean. Right, we are having some audio issues, apparently. Elisa, I believe you have some insights on this question. What are the special challenges and opportunities for vulnerable groups with regards to SDGs 6 and 7, so clean water and sanitation for all and clean energy?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I think the three key challenges that we see, the International Secretariat for Water has been working with youth and civil society for SDG 6 for over 30 years. And the three key challenges that we wanted to bring forward are, first and foremost, access to funding to implement innovative and youth-led local actions. A lack of representation in decision-making is not only about raising awareness and sharing information, but it's about going one step further and ensuring that we are co-designing these solutions and that we are fostering co-decision making with young people, with those communities that are most affected by water issues. These are in the question, so you speak about vulnerable groups, but I would like to say that these are not only vulnerable groups, but young people, women, indigenous communities are the change makers that are leading the way in so many parts of the world. Another challenge I would say would be adequate education and training for young people and to acquire knowledge and skills to better tackle the water and climate issues. So I think these are the top three that showed up in a poll. So I think that we are well aligned on these three challenges. And I would like to say that these three challenges were brought forward and identified by the Global Youth Movement for Water, which is a movement of over 370 youth-led organizations and allies that was catalyzed by the International Secretariat for Water in the lead up to the UN conference. And these key challenges were brought forward through the Fill Up the Glass campaign that aims to increase the political will for the achievement of SDG 6. And regarding regarding opportunities, I would just like to add that a specific point on access to job and employment opportunities. So according to the International Labour Organization, there's 172 million people that were unemployed worldwide in 2018. And through 2030, there's approximately 25 million young people between the ages of 15 to 29 years old that are expected to enter the labor force in search of work. And the water sector presents a tremendous opportunity to create jobs in a variety of different fields, and from technical jobs to jobs related more to global governance. There's so many opportunities to create jobs and employment opportunities in the water sector. And the International Secretariat for Water has just recently launched a program that aims to help young people navigate the water sector and identify their career pathway, which is the Youth for Water and Climate program. And we hope to see this program implemented in so many different parts of the world to help young people seize this opportunity of creating jobs and employment opportunities in the water space.
Now, Crystal, what do you think are the opportunities and challenges in particular for young people? Elisa has touched on that as well, but what do you think?
Yes, thank you. So similar to Elisa, I'm going to focus on children, youth specifically. So first I will address the challenges. Specific regions like Papua New Guinea, there's limited access to water. Specifically, children really have limited access to proper sanitation facilities. So technical challenges really does include the development and maintenance of water supply systems, water sanitation systems, and just sanitation infrastructure in general. And therefore, we have to focus on ensuring safe drinking water for this population. I will then next address the opportunities. So there are innovations such as water purification systems, affordable and efficient sanitation solutions, water-saving devices, and improved water management techniques that we should really be focusing on, specifically on improving access to clean water and sanitation for children specifically. Next, I will discuss water-borne diseases. So the challenge is children are particularly vulnerable to waterborne diseases such as diarrhea, typhoid, cholera, things that in the United States we would never think about nowadays. And this is primarily caused by contaminated water and poor sanitation. So this lack of clean water sources and proper sanitation facilities contribute to the spread of these diseases. Also to some opportunities. So this would include development and implementation of low cost water systems, treatment technologies specifically, such as point of use filters, disinfection methods that would be used to sanitize water and make sure that children specifically have clean drinking water. So this way it can improve their development and make sure that they are developing well, especially when it comes to their growth, mindset, education, etc. And lastly, I will address energy poverty and education. So specifically when it comes to the challenges, energy poverty really refers to the lack of access to modern energy services, especially this disproportionately affects children in disadvantaged communities. So pretty much without access to electricity, children are therefore inhibited from, using electricity to study, access, resources, or just, be able to acquire digital literacy skills, for example. And then, but for opportunities, we can look at this to bridge the energy poverty gap. And by utilizing and enhancing education opportunities, we can look at ways to educate communities and also create more energy efficient devices that can be used that is economical, that could be used to provide children with electricity in their homes, in their local communities, in areas in which they can have access to these resources, and it could provide a positive impact overall to their learning, development, and overall well-being.
Thank you, Crystal. I believe we have established our audio connection now with Farai there in Kenya. I hope you can hear me now, Farai. So we're wondering what are the challenges, opportunities with regards to for women, people with disabilities, for indigenous people, with regards to SDGs 6 and 7?
Yes, I hope you can hear me, Shucks.
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. It's great to be in this conversation. So in terms of the challenges, when we look at these vulnerable groups, women, children, people with disability, they have their own very specific challenges when it comes to SDG 6 and 7. The first is actually around access. They have limited access. Often they live in very marginalized areas. In the context of water, it's about sometimes limited access to water resources and services. And in the context of renewable energy, it's often in terms of access to technology and equipment. We find most marginalized people living in remote areas, far-flung, forgotten, where you even have limited road access or even connectivity to other communities. What that means is that they also have limited access to the skills that are needed, for example, for operations and maintenance, be it of solar systems or renewable energy systems, as well as for water and sanitation systems. And we also find, because again they are remotely located, there's poor supply chains and limited access to supplies, sometimes even funding constraints. So these quite heavily impact indigenous communities, women, children, people with disability, and often even their voice is not heard. So when they are not receiving services, this is often not even understood by others who have greater access. And then in terms of challenge, I think the biggest challenge we have, particularly as we move towards the SDGs in 2030, is about sustaining results. So where we have managed to achieve, for example, safe water access, It's now in terms of how do we sustain these so that they are not going back. And often sustaining operations maintenance is a big, big issue. Now, when we look at the opportunities, particularly for the water and sanitation sector, renewable energy allows us, for example, to now move from hand pumps, which served very localized communities, to, for example, solar powered water systems that can supply healthcare centers, schools, provide nutrition, a garden, for example, and even water for livestock, and that actually enhances livelihoods. We also see services being sustained for much longer periods, and also the ability to purify and reuse water resources where they are actually limited. So renewable energy, particularly for us in the water sanitation and hygiene sector, does present lots of opportunities for us.
Okay, so Crystal, have you any good examples of how water and energy services have been extended to women, to children, to young people, people with disabilities, Indigenous people?
Yeah, so specifically, one example is the Solar Mamas project, particularly that's in India. So that initiative focuses on educating and empowering women from rural communities on solar technologies. So specifically, women who may have limited formal education or may be illiterate in rural areas, they're educated and they're given education on how to install solar technologies within homes, within their local communities, and once they're given that training, they're then given employment, whether in their areas or in other locations. And so this provides them with education, and with education comes power, and they're able to give back to their communities as well as give themselves a formal education to promote upward mobility in terms of their current situation. This initiative started in Barefoot College, by the way, in India. And so by providing, education for marginalized groups, particularly women, individuals who have disabilities, we're able to, initiatives like this, they're able to promote, empower women to take on, claim their agency and take on these roles and providing not only, sustainability for themselves, but also for their environment.
And Farai, do you have a quick example from your work of a solution that is working?
Yes. So in La Guira in northern Colombia, we actually have huge indigenous community. And there we find that 40% of people, particularly in rural areas, do not have access to safely managed water. And what we do find is, particularly for the indigenous groups, these numbers become even more glaring. And often these communities are also impacted by droughts. And here we, as UNICEF, we have installed wind and solar power systems, and we've used this as an entry point for enhancing wash services for communities. We also see similar models in countries like Ethiopia, Malawi, Madagascar, and others, where again we are expanding access to wash services so that they also enhance livelihoods and also support income generation for households.
Here's a question for everyone. How can we ensure that the progress made on these two SDGs is inclusive and that the benefits reach everyone? Elisa, if we could start with you, please.
Yeah, thank you. So I think that at the International Secretariat for Water, everything that we do is by, for, and with. So whether it be with civil society, women, young people, indigenous communities, we are always working by, for, and with. So I think this needs to be applied to everything that we do, whether it is when developing a new project, a new initiative, when thinking about global governance mechanisms. We always need to make sure that we go by this motto, by, for, and with. At the youth level, one key message that was put forward by the youth movement during the latest UN Water Conference was the 30-30-30 target. So the idea of this target is that by 2030, we would need to have at least 30% of stakeholders involved in all water-related governance mechanisms to be young people under the age of 30 years old. So I think this is an interesting target to keep in mind as well. And lastly, I think that as we are speaking about a renewed multilateral framework at the United Nations level for the achievement of SDG 6, we need to make sure we think about how will this renewed framework be inclusive. So one of the key elements that was discussed during the latest UN conference was the nomination of a UN water envoy. And for us, of course, it's important for this water envoy, first of all, to have a political mandate, but above and beyond that, we believe it would be essential for this water envoy to be accompanied by an advisory group that would be representative of all the diverse groups, whether it be women, children, young people, indigenous communities, that this would be collaborative space for everyone to have a voice. So I think those are a few steps, a few elements of food for thought to help us make sure that our road to the achievement of SDG 6 is inclusive and the benefits reach everyone.
What about you, Crystal? What do you think? How do we make this more inclusive?
Definitely. I think it takes a multifaceted approach, specifically like jumping off of Elisa's point. We need to implement targeted approaches that address the specific needs and challenges faced by marginalized groups. So specifically looking at the unique circumstances, cultural practices, and socioeconomic situations. And so I think that it's important to understand what is hindering their access to clean water and energy, and then from there implementing interventions that can be used to see, okay, where are areas that we can work on making certain areas, improve certain areas, and make certain requirements on how we can enhance their quality of life. And then specifically to the points of SDG 6 and 7, definitely it's important to look at financial accessibility as well as data and monitoring. So to the point of financial accessibility, it's important to promote financial mechanisms and innovative financial models that can really look at areas where we can make clean water energy solutions affordable and accessible to marginalized groups. So specifically to the facts listed in SDG 6 and 7, international public financial flows to developing countries in support of clean energy amounted to $10.9 billion in 2019, which was down by nearly 24% from the previous year. And so specifically, it's important to include microfinance programs, grants, subsidies, and community-based financial systems and models that could be used in order to create financial inclusion for these areas, to increase these percentages and break down the barriers. And then next, I will speak on data and monitoring. So it's important to look at disaggregated data so that we can look at areas that are behind in clean water and sanitation and behind renewable energy efforts, and look at ways to combat or at least see where are we falling short, where are they falling short, and create use this accurate, up-to-date data to inform policymakers and initiatives on where can we focus on, where is this lack, and then moving forward there. My last point too is to support data and monitoring. Assessment of rivers, lakes in 97 countries in 2020 shows that 60% of water bodies have good water quality. For at least 3 billion people, the quality of water they rely upon is unknown owing to a lack of monitoring. So I think that regular monitoring and evaluation with data will be huge and very impactful when it comes to course corrections, especially when, for this movement particularly.
Farai, what do you think? How do we make sure that the benefits reach everyone?
Yes, the two panelists have already covered a lot of the big picture thinking, particularly around policy, financing mechanisms, supply chains. And really, for me, I think I will focus my response particularly on the practicalities of now getting a shift right on the ground where communities are hungry for for these particular solutions. And here I would like to give a very practical example of some of the work that we are doing, particularly around solar integration into our wash work, into our water sanitation and hygiene work in West Africa, where we actually have what we call a solar hub program. And through that program, what we are doing is we are bringing the two different SDGs together, empowering the water teams to understand how to apply solar and renewable energy work effectively and efficiently. And this is based on a lot of capacity building, bringing that balance, particularly around water resource use, sustainability, how you can assess it. So speaking to that point on data, and then ensuring, of course, that we are not over abstracting resources, but we are taking just enough, and then complementing that with ensuring that the systems, the power systems that we design are actually effective and are efficient, so that they're able to provide those solutions. So what we are seeing is we are doing a lot of training of counterparts in government, technical teams, also working with policy, around the policy angles, so that we open up markets, particularly in remote areas, so that they can be served, and ensuring that we develop models, whether it's for household financing some of these systems, or even for communities working together to finance these systems. So actually shifting from a policy perspective to a much more practical, hands-on solution on the ground, and ensuring that we bridge the gap of technology and knowledge, and we now bring it to where it is needed, and often where we would have not found it, say 5 or 10 years ago. So lots of opportunities on the ground.
Thank you, Faraya. Let me very quickly bring in a question from our audience here. We've got a question from Alex in Chicago. As a young person, how do I get my ideas heard at a high level like the UN? How do you recommend I can make a difference? Elisa, if we could come to you, you've made a speech before the UN General Assembly during the UN Water Conference, I believe. How would you answer Alex?
Thank you for the question. I think there's so many different ways. So I think that the first thing that I would say is that in the lead up to the UN conference, we created, as I mentioned before, the Global Youth Movement for Water that really aims to achieve this exact objective of ensuring that the voices of young people of all over the world are brought together, and collectively that we are stronger and able to influence change, whether it be at the UN level, whether it be at the country level, or even at the local level, really bridging that gap that my previous panelist has just mentioned. So I would invite you to join the movement and to also join the Fill Up the Glass campaign, which is aimed to achieve that exact objective of giving young people all over the world the tools to really influence change. Everyone can join the campaign, whether it be by sharing on social media, organizing an event in your community, sending letter to decision makers. And in the water space, there are so many different organizations that are working at every level that are part of this movement. So I would really invite you to connect with organizations, whether it be, for example, the World Youth Parliament for Water, that is doing a great job at bridging this gap from the local to the global level and ensuring that the voices of young people are heard. And I would just also like to take this opportunity to just share with you a recent call that's been launched with the 1 Million Youth Action Challenge. So we've spoken a lot today about that financial gap and how access to funding is a big barrier for marginalized groups to act. So the 1 Million Youth Action Challenge just launched a call for proposals. So if you are looking to access funding and opportunities to implement a locally led solution to address SDG 6, then I would really invite you to look out for this call to go to the youthwaterclimate.org platform and to submit your proposal. There's a possibility to access up to $5,000 in seed funding and technical support. So just, yeah, that partly answers the question, but I think this is essential in also showing that everyone, all youth all around the world can take action. We need action at the global level, such as the United Nations, but we also need to bridge the gap between the global governance space and the local action. And I think this is really essential, that we need people everywhere from all parts of the world acting at all levels to join the movement.
Thank you so very much. On that resounding note, we're going to have to wrap up our conversation. Unfortunately, a lot more to talk about. Thank you all so very much for your time, for your insights. A very important conversation there. It's not all doom and gloom. There are solutions that are possible if there is the will to implement them. Thanks to all our panelists for sharing your insights and expertise with us. And thanks to you, our audience, for your participation. For those of you watching on Zoom, you will see an exit survey pop up when you leave the meeting. If you can, please do spare a few minutes to fill it in. We would really appreciate your feedback. UN DESA will continue these global policy dialogues all year, with the next one this Thursday on SDGs 9 and 11. That's innovation and sustainable cities. We do hope you'll join us then. Please go to un.org/DESA for details on that event. And if you're interested in learning more about SDG progress, the Sustainable Development Goals Report 2023 will be released on July 10th. That report will also be available at un.org/DESA. Let me thank all our panelists once again and the organizer of today's event, UN DESA. Do enjoy the rest of your day or night from me and the team here at the SDG studio at UN headquarters. Goodbye from New York.